Tonight on Politicat, remembering Kobe Bryant and his legacy.
And tensions in the Middle East, how the U.S. strike caused ripples throughout the region.
Plus, an update on the citations following the Jeff Sessions protest on Northwestern's campus.
All that and more coming up tonight on Politicat.
It's your politics.
Right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Alexa McHale.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. We start tonight with the tragic news out of Southern California. On Sunday morning, retired NBA superstar and LA Lakers legend Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. He was 41. Bryant's 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 7 others were also killed. The pilot of the chopper had special clearance to fly that day, despite the LAPD grounding its helicopters due to foggy conditions and low visibility. As investigators continue to search for the cause of the crash, the nation and world grieve. Bryant won 5 NBA titles and was the league's MVP in 2008. He was a legend of the game and has been honored by teams and players across the league. Some took ceremonial shot clock violations to honor Bryant, while Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban said his team will retire Kobe's number 24.
Much has been made about how to view Bryant's complicated legacy. In 2003, he was accused of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old woman, but charges were later dropped after she refused to testify. A civil suit was settled out of court and Bryant publicly apologized. He leaves behind his wife, Vanessa, and 3 other daughters. Right here in Chicago, hundreds gathered outside of last night's Bulls game at the United Center to pay their respects. Politicat's Amanda Rooker was there.
Fans from across the country gathered outside the United Center Monday night following the death of basketball legend Kobe Bryant.
I was shocked. I was really shocked. I'm a mother of 3, so just even the thought of losing a kid, that was really painful.
Even hours before the Bulls game, crowds formed outside the stadium as people shared their stories.
Just watched him growing up, cried with him, laughed with him, smiled with him. It's bigger than basketball. It's bigger than the Lakers. He was somebody who touched our lives, who touched so many lives.
His competitive nature, his drive, that's really what I took from him. I may not have been the most talented, but if I could work hard, then perhaps I could be somewhat Kobe-like in a sense.
With chalk in their hands, fans wrote messages and drew pictures, leaving their mark outside the stadium in remembrance of the mark that Bryant left on them. One fan said it's the community's outpouring of support that's left him with encouragement.
It's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable presence. But the way the people come together about him, it makes you feel warm inside.
Even though Bryant never called the United Center home, fans said Chicago had a special connection to the superstar, and his impact will not be forgotten.
So for what he did for the city of Chicago is all those true basketball fans in Chicago that maybe were too young to experience a Michael Jordan. He was our version of that, and yeah, we'll never forget that.
Tributes for Bryant are expected to be back here at the United Center when the NBA All-Star Game comes to Chicago February 16th.
Amanda is here with us on desk, along with the Daily Northwestern sports editor, Charlie Goldsmith. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. What was the mood like last night at the United Center?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult. It was definitely a somber mood. People were crying, people were in tears, but also there was definitely joy there as well. I saw a lot of families that brought their kids. People were really just taking to heart the fact that you never know now these days, and you just have to hold your loved ones dear. And so it was sweet seeing kids run around and interact, and so it was definitely a bittersweet mood.
And Charlie, Amanda just talked about the joy. What can you tell me about Kobe's legacy? What is he going to be remembered by?
There are millions of fans and thousands of players who've been paying really close tribute to Bryant over the past few days. Some are saying they'll never wear his numbers again, and we can even look at Northwestern to see some of the people he's influenced. There's Chris Collins, his close family friend dating back to his childhood. And then there are 2 or 3 of the starters on the team who have said previously that Kobe's someone they idolized, someone they modeled their game after, and someone who influenced how they attack basketball and the challenge of becoming an elite professional or elite college athlete.
And Amanda, it's not just Lakers fans that have been showing their support from around the country. Is that something you noticed last night?
Yeah. I was talking to a lot of people last night that were basically saying this doesn't just affect Los Angeles. Basically, they were saying that basketball is a worldwide thing. It was something that these people grew up, no matter where they were in Chicago, they grew up watching Kobe, and so it's beyond just the Bulls, it's beyond just their team. Of course, they were supporting there was a lot of Bulls fans, a lot of Spurs fans. There were also people just from all over, just there to really honor Kobe, because basketball was something that he changed forever, and he also changed people's lives, not just in LA, but also in Chicago and all over.
And Charlie, I liked how you talked about the Northwestern connection earlier when you talked about Chris Collins and Evanston, but there's a big Chicago connection too, aside from just the United Center and the fans gathering last night with the NBA All-Star Game set to take place right here in Chicago in a few weeks. How do you expect fans or the league to honor Kobe during this event?
Kobe was one of the best all-stars in the history of the sport. His all-star games were incredibly memorable, and it would seem extremely likely that the NBA will honor him above and beyond, whether it be the 24-second violations that we're seeing now across the league, players wearing Bryant's number in his honor, patches on their jersey. There's no way to understate how the NBA will go above and beyond to honor and respect what Bryant was able to accomplish in the All-Star weekend in the city of Chicago.
And what we've already seen is that some players have said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable wearing number 8 or number 24. I'm going to switch my number. What do you think about that, guys, honoring Kobe by saying this is a sacred number? You know, we're not going to wear number 8 or number 24, the two numbers that he wore. Again, what do you think about that?
So many players in the league had two posters in their rooms as a child, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. So when you look at someone who you've loved for that long, it makes so much sense to see them pay that kind of tribute. But then on top of that, tonight Joel Embiid came out for the Philadelphia 76ers wearing number 24 in Bryant's honor. So I think we'll see both sides. There'll be some people who, want to remember Kobe in that way, and there'll be some people who want to remember Kobe by never wearing his number
again. I think that's special too, because you have guys who think about it in a different way. You have the ones who say, you know what, I'm going to honor him by not wearing it. Then there's also guys who say, I'm going to respect him by doing that. So I think that's really interesting that multiple NBA players have different perspectives like that.
Definitely, and thinking about paying a proper tribute, I'd like to talk about the reporting of this story. ABC News originally reported that all 4 of Bryant's children were on that flight. Amanda, how important is it to really make sure you know those facts before you start the story and before you get out there and report?
I think it was definitely something that was incredibly heartbreaking to hear about such an important story, broken really against journalistic rules. I think there was also journalists texting other people that they had speculated were dead, texting children, asking, how do you feel about your father passing away? And just imagine being that daughter receiving that text. Imagine being the relatives of Kobe Bryant hearing about your relative passing away before you were able to hear from the doctor or the coroner. That's just against journalistic standards. We have to figure out how to be above the fray of just wanting to be the first and actually really care about the accuracy, because this really affects people, and it was just disappointing to hear as a journalist that they compromised.
Definitely, and important to apologize and take ownership of that.
Absolutely.
After the fact as well.
What was interesting to me is that TMZ broke the news, and what followed.
TMZ's broken a lot of news, with Michael Jackson's death, and Kobe Bryant, I believe Whitney Houston too. TMZ is at the forefront.
But what followed was a lot of doubt, since people don't attribute TMZ the same journalistic credibility as the New York Times or the LA Times. And again, what followed was, for a story that was almost too crazy to believe, a lot of looking at the reporting as too crazy to believe for a minute, and it took a while for it to shake out.
And sticking in the journalism sphere, the Washington Post suspended one of its writers after Bryant's death, tweeted a link to a 2016 Daily Beast article titled, quote, Kobe Bryant's disturbing rape case, the DNA evidence, the accuser's story, and the half confession. Charlie, do you think the Post made a mistake by suspending her?
There's no right answer. There is no textbook for reporting on an athlete with a powerful legacy and also a complicated legacy. There's been a very conscious effort to try to include the totality of Kobe Bryant's life and career in reporting on him over the past few days. And what I noticed from that particular Washington Post story was that people weren't clear whether or not she broke their social media guidelines. I think this is just another example with this and the initial misreporting, how important it is to have guidelines on what we do and say on social media.
All right, Charlie and Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be back with more Politicat after this break.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
We will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back to Politicat. Let's turn our attention now to the precarious situation with Iran and the Middle East. Following Iran's retaliatory missile strike on a U.S. base in Iraq on January 8th, President Trump initially claimed that no personnel were injured. But last Friday, the Pentagon reported that 34 troops had been diagnosed with concussions or traumatic brain injuries. 8 of those service members were transported back to the United States.
At the World Economic Forum last week, President Trump downplayed the situation, dismissing the report of injuries as simply headaches. When asked if he thought traumatic brain injuries were serious, he then said, quote, "I don't consider them very serious injuries relative to the other injuries that I've seen." And to discuss this more, I'd like to welcome in our panel, we have Connor Echols, former intern at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C., and Olivia Lloyd, who is the news editor at NBN. And Connor, I'm going to start with you. Why do you think Trump is minimizing this whole situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not going to try too hard to get into Trump's head. I think that he probably does believe that traumatic brain injuries maybe aren't that serious, but strategically I think what he's trying to do is to avoid escalation. I'm no Trump supporter personally, but I think that what he's trying to do is a bit of a clumsy approach at stopping there from being more escalation by trying to change the narrative from there being an idea of Iran is continuing to escalate to that was the response and now we can wrap it up and now we can try to move to negotiation. I don't think that's a likely course of action, but I think that's most likely his strategic prerogative.
And Olivia, would admitting that soldiers were seriously injured mean that Trump made a mistake in the Middle East by ordering the strike on Soleimani to begin with?
I think the public could probably perceive it as such. Maybe acknowledging the extent to which American troops were injured would maybe give off a bad face for Trump on the international forum when he's, ordering this contentious strike. So I think maybe it could be also kind of seen as a clumsy move to acknowledge that there weren't really injuries when there actually were. But again, it's hard to get into his head.
And since the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, tensions remain extremely high in the Middle East. Connor, I'll start with you. What do you think President Trump's aims are in this region right now?
That's a great question. We saw this morning, right, the peace plan coming out. I think that the primary thing that he wants to do is something really big. It's hard to tell exactly what he wants to do beyond just trying to some extent contain Iran. Ideally, I think he wants regime change, but I doubt that's going to happen. And then also he wants to have a big name thing like a peace plan with Israel and Palestine. But I'm not sure that anything that he's doing right now is achieving those goals. I think it's more destructive.
Definitely. And Olivia, what do you think the end game really is for Trump in terms of Iran and Iraq?
Again, that's kind of difficult to discern. There's been a lot of involvement in the region in the last decade or so with invasions and overturning in regimes. So again, it's kind of hard to tell, but I think the U.S. has a kind of longer endgame that's kind of nebulous right now, but I'm assuming that as this whole situation progresses, we might find out more.
And the Iraqi parliament actually voted on January 6th to expel U.S. forces from the country, much to the ire of President Trump, who threatened sanctions in response. Olivia, do you see the U.S. leaving Iraq in the near future, or is that too simple, or is it more complicated than that?
I think it's definitely more complicated than that. We had the whole thing a little recently with President Trump saying that the U.S. would pull troops out of Afghanistan and Syria, prompting Jim Mattis to resign over that. So I think it's not so clear-cut as whether or not the U.S. will pull out or stay, and I think there's going to be, maybe we can see a gradual withdrawal over time, but I think for now there's going to be a significant U.S. presence in the Middle East.
Connor, is this parliamentary vote, vote from the Iraqi parliament, is this an empty gesture?
It's not an empty gesture, but it's one that they can't really back up. Iraq has asked the U.S. to leave a lot over the years. It's not a new thing. It is what the Iraqi people want, absolutely. It is what the Iraqi parliament wants. But also at this point, especially with the protests that have racked the country over the last few months, this political system has very little legitimacy in the first place. So the idea that they're going to be able to put any force behind this strikes me as unlikely.
And earlier this week, there were reports that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was struck by mortar fire, injuring at least one person. Connor, do you think this will further escalate the situation, and how do you think so?
Once again, it's really up to Trump what happens here. I doubt that it's going to go too far. I believe it was a Katyusha rocket, which I wouldn't expect to come from an actual Iranian force, so you expect it to be a paramilitary force. And the popular mobilization units and groups like that are kind of semi-associated with the Iraqi government are ones that the U.S. isn't going to want to actually attack directly. So I doubt that we're going to do anything like that would escalate. If someone had died, I think it would be a different story. But I think with an injury and Trump trying to even like emphasize that guy's now back at work and things like that, I would say that escalation is unlikely.
Olivia, do you think this potentially hurts the way the situation is going, Trump's 2020 election prospects, his foreign policy mistakes or decisions?
Certainly, I think it doesn't help. I mean, I know the U.S. has been, in kind of a tense state since the attack on the Iranian general. I've heard talks of like World War III and everything, though I'm not sure how reasonable that is. But I don't think that the public tension really helps Trump in terms of presidential campaign prospects. I think if anything, it kind of, it makes him seem a little uncertain about what his plan is in the Middle East. So I'm not sure if that's really helpful for him.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. We will be right back.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. Western University, the possibilities are endless.
For this week's Money Minute, Zach Miller explains the impact coronavirus is having on financial markets at home and abroad. Zach?
Thanks, Justin. The Dow Jones Monday fell 453 points. This was the largest single-day drop since October, largely spurred by the outbreak of coronavirus, which has now killed over 100 people in China. The disease, which the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is referring to as the novel coronavirus, is part of a family of viruses including MERS and SARS, which affect the upper respiratory system. The Chinese government has placed travel restrictions on Wuhan, the city at the center of the outbreak, and surrounding areas in an attempt to slow the spread of the virus. Other nations are attempting to evacuate any citizens in the region. With 5 confirmed cases in the U.S. and more in Japan, Australia, Canada, and France, investors are responding. Stocks with exposure to the Chinese marketplace have been the hardest hit. These include airlines like United and Delta, as well as companies relying on Chinese semiconductors, including NVIDIA, Apple. Apple, Disney, and Nike each fell Monday as well. The shock hasn't been limited to the U.S. markets. French, German, and Japanese indexes have also dropped precipitously. Chinese exchanges have remained closed so far in celebration of the Lunar New Year. The world will be keeping an eye on the novel coronavirus in the coming weeks. By screening travelers, educating citizens about symptoms and prevention, and investing in medical infrastructure, we can keep it from spreading much farther. However, the virus can take up to 2 weeks to develop symptoms, meaning many who are infected may not yet be diagnosed. The situation will likely get worse before it gets any better. For Money Minute, I'm Zach Miller.
Thanks, Zach. The second confirmed case of coronavirus came right here in Chicago. A woman in her 60s returned from China on January 13th, although officials said she did not use public transportation and largely remained at home. She was admitted to the hospital last week. And now for some impeachment news. Last Friday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo received attention after he, following an interview with NPR, reportedly called the interviewer to his office to criticize her for asking him about Ukraine and attempted to test her knowledge by having her point to Ukraine on an unmarked map. And this week, much has been made about former National Security Advisor John Bolton's upcoming memoir, set to hit shelves in March. In it, Bolton writes that the president told him he did not want to give military aid to Ukraine until the country began investigations into the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton, and the Bidens, a claim that Trump has denied many times and one that is at the center of the impeachment trial.
Reports around Bolton's book have re-intensified demands that witnesses be called in the impeachment trial, John Bolton being one of them. Bolton himself has said that he would be, quote, prepared to testify, unquote, should the Senate issue a subpoena. Following the presentation by Trump's legal team, the Senate will have 16 hours to submit questions, at which point they will discuss calling additional witnesses. It's unclear at the time whether the 4 Republicans needed to achieve that would support any subpoenas. We'll leave it there for now. Politicat will be back after this break.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Now we're turning to the continued fallout over Jeff Sessions' visit to campus last November. 5 Northwestern students who received civil citations by the city of Evanston saw their cases dismissed in advance of their hearing earlier this month. NNN's KAILA Nichols was there and joins us now with late details.
Thanks, Alexa. Students who were given citations after the Jeff Sessions protest in November were expecting a court hearing on January 9th, but when they arrived at the Evanston Civic Center, they were told that the citations had been dropped with no explanation. Now, students are expecting to face disciplinary action from Northwestern, even one student who claims they weren't present at the protest. Civil citations issued to 5 Northwestern students after the protest of Jeff Sessions' lecture in November were dismissed by the city of Evanston one day before a hearing earlier this month.
Thank you all for coming. I'm crying. So apparently yesterday the city decided to dismiss the citations, which is, we don't know why, but it's a good thing.
According to new documents obtained by NNN, the city dismissed the citations due to, quote, evidence unavailable at the time of the hearing. The citations themselves describe a range of behavior, such as pushing through multiple police officers, striking the door, breaching the peace, and making physical contact with the wall. Ross Patton, one of the 5 students who received citations, says that the group was not informed the citations were dropped before their court date.
The person from the city was like, these have already been resolved, and we didn't know that. So then that was news to us too, but it was good news. We were worried about potentially, because we were planning on fighting these if they had been brought.
More than 25 students walked to the Civic Center in support of their peers who had been issued citations, organized by a Facebook event titled Pack the Court.
Well, because we thought that this was going to be like a thing. We thought this was going to be like, we're going to go and they said the maximum fine that we were going up against was like $125, and for a lot of folks who got 2 or 3 citations, like that's a lot of money to just pay out of pocket.
Last month, the university said the citations were issued for conduct directed towards police, such as pushing, grabbing, or kicking police officers as they attempted to perform their duties and secure the building. They do not create a criminal record. And though they're legally in the clear, those students say they're still facing disciplinary action from the university. Even one student who says they weren't even present the night of the protest.
Some folks are facing probation, some folks are facing sort of education things. Some folks weren't even at the protest.
So,
A university spokesperson said the university did not take part in the court hearing and said that students can be cited by law enforcement authorities, including Northwestern University Police, for acts that violate the law. Students may also be held accountable by the university. The university also said it cannot discuss student conduct as a matter of student privacy. It's still unclear how the 5 students were identified. A university spokesperson said, "The Office of Student Conduct receives reports regarding student conduct from a variety of sources, including faculty, staff, students, community concern reports, on-call staff, and police." Patton says he hopes everyone is aware of this process.
We also didn't want the dialogue around the policing of this event and the policing of Northwestern students in general to stop, and so we thought that like getting some collective action started, getting some people involved, getting some media involved would be a good way to do that.
Joining KAILA now is NNN's Andrew Rowan, who also contributed on the reporting. Great job to both of you who did it together. KAILA, I'll start with you. We just heard in the package that there's still pending disciplinary action from Northwestern. Is there any timetable on when the students will hear from Northwestern?
See, that's something that we really can't gauge at the moment. Just as you saw in the story right there, the university maintains a very high level of privacy. They don't reveal a lot when it comes to these situations, and the students themselves, even as I was talking to them, they couldn't really disclose a lot about their situations. And also the student who says that they weren't at the protests last November, Christopher Mayorga, they claim that they weren't there, but now they're still awaiting clearance from the Office of Student Conduct. So I think with time, we're going to see some updates on that.
And Andrew, something that has come to light since the protests is that Northwestern student protesters don't have amnesty. Can you tell us more about some implications of protesting on campus?
Sure. So the university in the student handbook has a 2-page policy. It basically starts assuring freedoms of speech, dissent, and demonstrations as long as they're made in a peaceful fashion. So ultimately, protesters can't disrupt university functions, and they define that as anything from research to lectures to classes. But when students don't follow the rules or the police instructions at those events, that's when they're in violation of the student handbook, and that's when they face that disciplinary action, potentially.
All right, Andrew, KAILA, and also Chloe Cope, who contributed to the reporting, thank you so much for your work over these past few weeks. And that's all the time we have for tonight on Politicat. I'm Justin Sweetwood.
And I'm Alexa McHale. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.